Hello, and welcome to our Diversity in Health podcast. I'm Martha, she, her pronouns.
And I'm Anne, also she, her pronouns.
I'm Laura, also she, her pronouns.
And I'm Max with he and him pronouns.
So today we want to talk about what it means to be transgender or trans. And as everyone on our team identifies as cisgender, meaning our gender identity matches the sex we were assigned at birth, we wanted to invite someone who identifies as transgender to help us out. So joining us is my best friend and all-around incredible human being, Eliot. Welcome. Who's going to tell us a little bit about his experience navigating the German healthcare system and living out as a trans man. A small disclaimer before we start: trans people are by no means a monolith with one lived experience, but we hope that Eliot's perspective can be informative and helpful for people who'd like to understand more about what being trans means. So welcome. We're so delighted you could be here, Eliot. Can you tell us a little about yourself?
So I am British. I've been out of the country for almost 15 years. I've been in Germany for 7. And I've been, just for the purposes of what we're going to discuss, I've been operating in terms of being trans exclusively within the German system. And yeah, my language skills are pretty good. I'm about a C1 level, which has helped. And I'm really glad you guys are working on this. It's very important that someone does.
Yeah, we think so too. Before we continue, do you want to tell us how you picked your name?
Yeah, well, the story I tell people, or the true story?
Whichever you'd like to share.
So, have you guys ever heard of a poem called The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock?
No.
No.
Very famous in English literature. It's by T.S. Eliot. And it's about anxieties about being a man, being a human, getting old, being impotent, being out of control in the universe. And I thought, that's cheerful. No, it's a beloved poem of mine, and it's always meant a lot to me. And that's part of the reason I picked the name as well.
I love that.
Really nice.
Yeah.
It's fun choosing your own name. I feel like maybe everyone should have an option when they're 21 to stick with the one their parents gave them, or
Yeah, I like that idea.
Me too. So I will continue, and I will first give you a brief definition. So according to the Oxford Dictionary, transgender can be used to describe a person whose sense of personal identity and gender does not correspond to that person's sex at birth, or which does not otherwise conform to conventional notions of sex and gender. So can you maybe, Eliot, briefly explain what transgender or trans means to you?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you phrased it that way, what it means to me, because yeah, it seems to mean a lot of different things to a lot of different trans people. And some people just transition to be outside the binary. Some people want to do the classic almost model of becoming the opposite gender to what they were assigned at birth. I guess that's what it means to me. That would be my experience, having lived my entire life pretty sure that I was not a woman. I finally get to change to something that feels better. And so in that sense, because my experience is not that of someone who was assigned male at birth and lived their life as a man and then grew into a 35-year-old male adult, I'm comfortable with calling myself a trans man. And that's all right with me. As long as it's got the word man in it, I'm cool with it, basically. And I must say, I do prefer, and most trans people agree, much prefer the term transgender to transsexual, because sexuality and gender are separate concepts, of course. And also there's something salacious about the word sexual. It makes people's ears prick up when it's covered in the press or in public documents, and that sucks. Because, you know, it's got nothing to do with sexuality and everything to do with gender, you know?
Yeah, I think also by using transsexual, you're also just sexualizing people. They're just trying to describe how they want to exist in the world, and by using the word sex, like you said, everybody's ears sort of prick up and they go, ooh, what? You know, and
think about the classic bad publicity for trans people. Do we want them in our bathrooms checking us out while we pee? Do we want, you know, to have, not that it's a very attractive image, but as soon as you hear transsexual, don't you just think Transylvania? Frankenfurter.
I was waiting for a musical interlude.
There'll be more. It's me.
And do you want to tell us when and how you first noticed that you not identify with your sex that you gave at birth?
This is often a question that people who come out later in life, they often find that question quite difficult, because if they say, this year, they feel like it takes away from their credibility. But I do sort of fit the classic model of, as soon as I became conscious of what gender was, I realized it was wrong. The thing is, it's so frightening as a child to feel something like that, and without having any frame of reference outside yourself, you just hope no one will notice and you power through. So that was definitely my experience from going to nursery school, kindergarten, aged 5. And throughout my life, I've just never really, I've deliberately not paid attention to it. It's easy to slot into a queer female identity, much easier. And that's what I did for a long time. Turned out not to be what was going on with me. But yeah, a lot of people say, I was more interested in climbing trees than playing with dolls, but the way it manifested for me was just feeling profoundly uncomfortable around girls. Like at some point, one of them is going to look at me for a bit longer than they should and be like, hang on a minute, you're not a girl. This was my constant fear. Strange, huh?
Yeah, but I think you're not alone in that. I think that's something that a lot of people who feel different, but especially queer people, experience, that they think, when is everyone going to find out? Right.
And what happens then?
Right. What's it gonna be? I feel that some way about not being German. If I'm in a room, I'm like, how long is it gonna take everybody to notice I'm not German?
Yep.
So obviously the stakes are much lower there, but the anxiety and this idea that you should be fitting into the status quo of the space that you're in.
Yeah, I think everyone can relate to that on some level. And I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I honestly think if we all can recognize that in our own lives, that is the beginning of empathy and the end of othering. And I don't feel very jealous of my experience. I would love to universalize it. Everyone can relate to this experience in some way or another, I think.
And also, maybe regarding this topic, you can tell us a bit more about how was your coming out, like specifically, like would you define it like as a turning point in your life? Because I can imagine it was maybe some kind of relief. And maybe you can also tell us a bit how your family and friends reacted to that.
Yeah, it's one of the, I honestly think if it hadn't been for the pandemic, I might never have done this. Because it's one thing to go to work one day with long hair and, presenting as reasonably femme. And it's another thing to then go to work the next day and say, I chopped all my hair off and now you have to call me Eliot. Mm-hmm. Like that's a bigger leap than what actually happened, which is I had weeks and weeks to sit at home thinking, and the whole world kind of got reset. And it was a good time to go in when things kicked off again at my job and just say, so some shit went down while we were all locked up and I made this big change. Like that was hugely helpful. And I'll never know if it was easier or more difficult that I wasn't in direct contact with my family, different country, can't visit probably for some time. It also gave me the opportunity to say, to tell my parents and my family back home what's going on and know that I wouldn't have to face them for a little while. That definitely helped. In terms of it being a turning point, the thing I'm battling with at the moment, and this will bring us into the topic of healthcare, is how sudden and complete it seems to everyone around me. But the fact is, I've had a long time to think about this, and everyone else has had a few months. I get it. It's different for me than it is for them. But okay, I'm trying to make this as clear as I can. I came out about it, and my life then suddenly became this magical thing where I have, 50% more energy because I'm not faking and performing anymore. I have more profound pleasure in my personal relationships and every interaction, even at the supermarket on the checkout, because people are now seeing me. And if they respond well to me, then that just feels so great. Whereas when I've been talking to people and healthcare professionals as well, they've said it just seems like it's happening very quickly. Are you sure you don't want to take some time to think about this before you start telling people and broadcasting it on Facebook and making these medical decisions and permanent changes to your body? And what if you change your mind? And what about your kid? And it's like, fuck's sake, I've waited almost 35 years. But that's a very a big difference in perception. That's it must seem very incautious, but fuck, I just wish I'd done it 10 years ago.
Yeah, I can, I guess, partially imagine. And I was gonna ask you, like, if there were any specific things that's helped you during or even before coming out, but I think you already mentioned some. I thought it very interesting that, for example, like the pandemic situation or being far from home were things that actually helped you. Even so, one could imagine that these are actually things that can, like, make things harder, in a lot of different cases. But was there anything else that was made you feel more comfortable or what helped you during your coming out or before that?
Well, it's probably obviously the fact that the internet exists. I mean, this is slightly off topic, but I'm 35, and I'm also basically born kinkster as well, as in as a child I also had all these strange fetishes. And the thing is, before I'm pre-internet. I think I had regular access to the internet from being about 19 or 20 onwards. And if you grow up with those kinds of strange things and no one around you is talking about it, you really are all at sea. You go out into the world, you put yourself in risky situations, like I recall buying a magazine about fetish stuff from my local newsagent, and the creepy dude that worked there was like, so if you're interested in this kind of thing, I can like show you some stuff in the back room, that kind of shit, where you think, how am I still alive? Whereas compare that to this, which is I have these feelings, I can anonymously do all kinds of research online, I can join support groups online and talk to people with experience, I can get tips on safety, I can get, like, it's safer, I don't feel alone. And if I have a bad experience in my daily life, something that is really upsetting, I can complain to a big sympathetic group of internet people and get nice feedback within the half hour. And I guess in a way, it's strange that I identified as queer for so long, queer female, but that community is often, not always, much more aware of trans issues, and therefore you feel much safer coming out when that's your circle, So that's all been very helpful. Just the fact that I live in fucking Berlin and have access to the internet. And I'm much older to be doing this as well. Like, I have a lot of experience behind me, and that helps. Kids, teenagers, they wouldn't have that.
Yeah, I think that community is definitely super important. And can you tell us a little bit about your experiences in the queer and transgender community in Berlin, on the internet, wherever you may find yourself?
Yeah, the differences are fascinating. I'm not sure if I'm still bisexual. This is a bit of a long story, but apparently changes in sexuality are fairly common when you come out as trans. But for a very long time, and probably still, I identified as bisexual. Being part of the queer community as a bisexual is not always that great, to be honest. There's a lot of, you never quite feel like you belong anywhere. Everyone views you with a certain amount of suspicion, and you're simultaneously hypersexualized and very vehemently rejected a lot of the time. So I've actually found that being part of the queer community as a bi woman at times really fucking sucked, but I'm not exaggerating. Universally, my experiences in trans communities online have been completely supportive, completely full of solidarity. And that's a place where I genuinely feel like I belong, even pre-transition with a big smooth face. This has been a fascinating thing to notice. So that's a big difference.
Yeah, and I know that you and I, for a long time have talked about being queer and straight passing. And so that when
Yep.
even when you do show up in a queer space, everyone's like, so where's your boyfriend? And
Yep.
you're like, I'm
Look for a
here.
threesome, are we? Yeah.
What do you not understand? Like,
Whereas in the trans community, there has been no gatekeeping. No, just
Yeah.
fuck.
can
People,
you explain maybe
Yeah.
gatekeeping, or shall I, so that for people
go
who don't
ahead.
know
You're good at this. You
Yeah,
explain
okay.
gatekeeping.
So gatekeeping can exist in any kind of community, but in the way we're talking about, that's people who sort of create a metric or standards for what it means to be queer. So that if you want to be in a queer space, bisexuals are often sort of otherized in these spaces, because it's like, well, just decide. Either you're a straight person, or you're a lesbian if you're a woman, or you're a gay man, or you're straight if you're a man. And people have this feeling that you can't commit fully, that you're unwilling to be completely. Why can't you just say you're a lesbian? Isn't that what it is? Or why can't you just say you're straight? Surely it can't be both. And so gatekeeping is saying, well, what you're telling me is not really enough. This is the way it should be. And this can be in the way that people dress, that if you are presenting more butch and wearing more masculine clothing as a lesbian, you might be more or less, depending on the space, accepted in that space. But in general, people talk about people who present as femme, who like to wear makeup, who like to wear dresses. And when they step into queer spaces, are very often not recognized as being queer, or made to feel like they're not doing it the correct way.
Yeah. This word enough is very important in the context of gatekeeping, this idea of being enough.
Yeah.
And it's literally a hashtag in the trans community. I am trans enough. It's much more welcoming.
Yeah.
I've got a fairly thick skin, but I'm 35 with life experience behind me. A younger gay trans man might have more trouble with that. So I don't know if it's always a good mix. And it really brings me back to the concept of being transsexual versus being transgender. The T in LGBTQI, etc., doesn't necessarily belong. Like a straight trans man or a straight trans woman might not have much to look for in an LGBTQ space. It's quite confusing, isn't it? But it's important. These distinctions really matter.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's also quite hard that you still think in these kind of categories when you go into the LGBTQ community, when you think that it should like broaden the view of people, and you also already have these categories when you think in heteronormative categories. So I think I'm really thankful to hear it from you, from your personal experiences, but I didn't think that these categories are still so straight and limited. Yeah.
It's funny because everyone wants to have their identity, something they could be proud of and like identify with. But at the same time, these boxes are getting smaller and smaller. And it's maybe at some point it'd be like the Big Bang. That would be nice, actually.
And Eliot, what if we think about out of this LGBTQ community, if you think about experiences with discriminations because of your sexual identity in your everyday life, what can you tell us about this?
So let's say it loud and proud, intersectionality, because the only way I could have more privilege is if I was a cis man, you know? That's that helps a lot. Like oh goodness, it's really hard to explain. I was talking about this with a trans woman friend of mine. If my friend Taylor, she won't mind me using her name, if my friend Taylor with, you know, a small frame but still fairly big shoulders, still 5 o'clock shadow, clearly wearing a very beautiful wig but clearly not her real hair, you know, if she tries to go into a women's toilet, it's a very different kind of panic than if I walk into the men's. Generally speaking, if people shout after me, which does happen quite often, if people shout after me as I'm going into the toilet, it's along the lines of, I think you've made a mistake, as opposed to, the fuck do you think you're doing? Whereas Taylor gets the fuck do you think you're doing response, you know? that's something I just want to make very clear in terms of how trans people might experience discrimination. I am not Black or a person of color, and I'm not a trans woman. They're in much more danger. I'm more likely to get away with it, quote unquote. So my experiences trying to go in the men's toilet is generally where this happens. Being on the phone, like, that's a tricky one, because I've been applying for some language schools recently, and in every email I sent, I write my name, I write he, him, ihn after my name. And I actually went so far as to write in one email, I am a trans man and I would like to understand that I'll be able to use the toilet of my choice if I choose your school to pay for your services. And I've still had this phone call with the guy, my phone interview, where he called me Frau Rix on about 4 occasions. And eventually I had to say, ich muss Sie leider korrigieren. Sie sprechen jetzt mit Herrn Rix, Herr Eliot David Rix. Ich bin trans man. I had to say it on the phone, and that fucking sucks. Awareness would solve this problem. It's not malicious, it's just fucking lazy and ignorant.
Yeah.
Just this idea that someone might say they're called Herr Rix and sound feminine on the phone, and that they would assume must be trans. Stick with Herr. That would have been really nice, because as much as I can cope with these conversations, I come off the phone and I feel the adrenaline, it's not a great feeling.
Yeah, because this also seems for me like something really easy to adapt, because like it doesn't take much effort to just call you by Herr instead of Frau.
Sure.
So yeah, would be
Yeah.
really nice to see some more change towards that regard. Yeah, I would like to go to a slightly different direction now, if you don't mind. I don't know if you
Sure.
are familiar with the ICD-10. It's the International Classification of Diseases, which is
Yeah.
commonly used not only in Germany but on the whole world apparently. And I don't know if you know, but it defines transsexualism. You already told us that you don't like transsexualism as a word, but this is what they use.
Certainly.
And
No,
they
sure, I
define
understand.
it in the ICD-10 as a mental illness. And I would like you to ask what are your thoughts on this, or what kind of impact this has on you personally, and maybe also as well as on the whole trans community.
Yeah, in preparation to talk about this, I did actually canvass on a Facebook site that I'm a member of. I wrote that I won't mention anybody's name, but I am about to talk to some, students of public health about this classification, and I would like to know how you all feel about it. Personally, as I have already said, I do not like the term transsexual, and I've now explained why, and I see that you guys understand that. I personally would prefer to have it classified as a physical illness than a mental illness, because there's fuck all wrong with my mental health. The problem is being read in a gendered society as the wrong gender. We could sit here all day and talk about the mystery of gender and how I could see gender for what it is, a social construct, and still this would mean so much to me that I'm prepared to go through all this medical treatment. We could talk about that all day, but I don't consider it a mental illness, more of a physical one for me. This was very much the theme of people's responses in this Facebook group. Most people said there's nothing wrong with me that a transition wouldn't cure. And that really, again, sort of backs up my thing that it's more a body than a mind issue. People generally, and passionately do not like the medicalization of it, any kind of classification of it as a disease. It's very hard to divide the emotional aspect from this. You could say that someone could be born with, say, a deformity of the leg, which is correctable with surgery. This doesn't carry the same stigma as classifying trans as a physical, quote unquote, malformation that needs to be, quote unquote, corrected. Look at me air quoting. It's so hard to talk about this. People I spoke to, the general line is, if I could get the treatment I want without having to be pathologized and medicalized, that would feel wonderful. But as it happens, I cannot. Unless this is classified properly as a disease, mental or physical, preferably physical, I simply won't get any treatment and I'll have to live my entire life like this. And that's a hell of a place to be stuck. And I don't know if I've mentioned, no, I haven't yet. I'm actually seeing a doctor who has just opened a practice this October in Berlin. And in my first consultation with this doctor, he asked me to describe why I'm here, what am I looking for? Literally, he more or less said, what unmet needs do you have that hormone therapy could meet? And I explained my story. And he said, right, so for you, it's not as much about dysphoria as euphoria. You want to feel euphoric about who you are. And I said, yes, exactly. And thank you for putting it that way. And he said, the thing is, I'm going to have to pathologize you when I make my diagnosis to the health insurance company, or they will not pay. So I hear you say euphoria. I hear you say that you don't have any dysphoria or not much, but I will have to put that in my report. Are you okay with that? And it's like, yeah, it's so cool that you put it that way, but I know this doctor is in the minority. I know because in this group I'm a member of on Facebook, people are weeping with gratitude that this man exists. Like I went, I was received with empathy. I didn't have to fake any dysphoria to get what I needed. I would like to think this is the future.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's magical. This doctor only just exists since this October, you know?
That's incredible, because what I wonder is sort of, was he motivated because of his own interest, because he knows someone who's close to him who's trans, so he has a little bit of personal experience? Was this something that he came across in his professional development and decided to pursue more? Because there needs to be more, but I get the feeling that there's not that much professional development in terms of trans competent healthcare. How do we make people feel safe and seen and heard?
I wonder, this is something I could definitely ask him. It's just, you know, you always have the sense when you're in doctor's office that their time is fairly precious, and I did not get into that, but I would be extremely interested to know the narrative that I would imagine prevents more doctors from approaching it this way is this idea of, what if this person changes their mind? What if they change their mind and take action against me for not grilling them more thoroughly about whether they really wanted what they said they wanted? I believe in that sense, this doctor's really going out on a limb and taking a huge risk. I don't know what kind of protection is in place for doctors if a trans patient changes their mind. And by the way, this doesn't happen. It's the same narrative of women who regret their abortions. There aren't that many of them. The majority of women experience relief if they get an abortion when they want one. The majority of people who have abortions are women who already have kids. We all know this. Well, I would imagine you guys, but that's changing the narrative on abortion has been very important. And this also should apply to being trans, I think. Have you guys ever heard of Linus Gieser? So Linus Gieser is a trans man, lives here in Berlin. He's recently written a book about his experience, basically. It's a really great book. He has also been on a podcast, whose name escapes me, but I can easily send you a link. And he said this narrative of don't make any big decisions, permanent changes, what if you change your mind? This often comes up in how to treat trans youth. And he basically made the point that kids try stuff out, especially teenagers. That's what they do. And what's wrong with that? Like if you do take something like puberty blockers, there's nothing irreversible there. There's actually no reason why kids shouldn't have the opportunity to try things out when they're younger. And again, this is where people need to come away from this narrative of, if you change your mind, it'll ruin your life. There are some irreversible aspects of hormone therapy, of course. But if I suddenly wake up in 2 years' time and think, oh God, what have I done? Then I'll be, I'll go back to being a woman, but I'll have a bit of facial hair. Plenty of women have facial hair. Like if we could relax generally about gender markers, the stakes would be lower and people would feel so much more free generally.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, this idea that letting a child make decisions and have agency with regards to their gender identity when they're not necessarily sure, what about the irreversible damage? I think we could argue there's some pretty irreversible damage from having to pretend to be a gender that you're not for all of your formative years.
This came up in that Facebook survey I did about the disease classification. People saying, the mental damage has been done to me by not having the treatment. I will become ill and suicidal without the treatment. Then, you could say untreated, trans people who are denied access to treatment will end up mentally ill. but you can't necessarily say that they start off as being so. Now, I did a little thought experiment with myself. I thought very carefully about the hormone treatment. And I thought, if I woke up tomorrow morning and there was no possibility of ever doing it, quick, tell me, how would I feel? And I thought, this little blanket of horror just fell down on me. It's strange, because as I said, I've been very lucky. I managed to find a therapist and a sympathetic endocrinologist. This puts me in the massive minority. I haven't had to think about what it would be like not to have access, because it's all gone pretty quickly and smoothly. When I thought for a second about what if someone said, yeah, no, not going to happen. Just the idea of going back in the box, back into prison, just makes me feel just blind with horror. It's awful. But some people, in some countries will never get treatment. How do they live? How do they cope?
Mm-hmm.
Every minute of the day that you're in public, and even when you're alone, you'd be, Jesus Christ, it doesn't bear thinking about.
Yeah.
So
yeah, really devastating. And I think that's really interesting to phrase it as, if we just let people be who they are, then we wouldn't have these mental health issues that are being used then to document and justify someone's right to be themselves.
It's that simple.
Yeah.
And bizarre.
true.
Yeah, Christ. I mean, people keep saying, it's easy for you in Berlin, What if you go out to like some other smaller German place and you think, okay, yeah.
And I think this is a good point to for the next question, good time. So because we were already talking a little bit about mental health problems, so you were talking about it, and evidence also shows that there are significantly increased rates of mental health problems among transgender people. Is this also something you or people you know from the transgender community have experienced?
Yeah, I mean, correlation is not causation, of course. You can be mentally ill and not trans. You can be trans and not mentally ill, leaving aside the classification we've already discussed. But, it makes logical sense that if someone goes through, if you take the smallest amount of trans dysphoria you can imagine, just feeling wrong in your body in a way you can't put your finger on, that's going to have a significant impact on your life. And it's going to be a significant stressor, and stress leads to mental illness. It can be as simple as not feeling good in your body, therefore not having social confidence, therefore not being able to make friends, not feeling confident applying for jobs, having trouble getting recognized at work. It makes sense that if you have this on your mind, it'll lower your quality of life considerably. And if you come to someone who gets to the point where it's bad enough that they seek help, then it's hard to know whatever happened, isn't it? It's hard to say at what point, if you'd had treatment, would this mental illness never have arrived. Someone could maybe spend the rest of their life unpicking the damage from living half of it in a gender identity they weren't comfortable with. If you have such a big challenge, of course, your mental health is going to suffer. Your energy will be lower. You'll have everything in life will just be a little bit harder. I mean, it's very, very common for trans people to report mental illness. And yeah, I guess that's really no surprise, is it?
Yeah. I wanted to talk about something that could also contribute to people experiencing negative emotions that might also contribute to their mental illness. So can we talk a little bit about dead naming?
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Okay. So for those of you who don't know, dead naming is a term for when other people continue to use the name that someone has used before they transitioned. And this could be because they refuse to use the new name, because they say, well, I've always called you Georgia, so that's who you're going to be till the day you die to me. Or it could be because your old name is still on official documents. So every single time you have to go to some official government building or to the doctor, they'll use your old name, even though that's what you'd prefer not to. And that doesn't sound great. I think everyone can agree, but could you tell us a little bit about what it feels like when you get called by your old name?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. There's a writer called Danny Lavery, who's a trans man, US trans man, and he talks about disliking the term dead name because so much of the language around people coming to terms with his transition is the language of bereavement and death. Whereas for most trans people, as me included, you'd really experience it as more of a magical rebirth, full of potential and action and promise, the exact opposite of death. For that reason, I do prefer the term old name to dead name, but that's because I haven't experienced that much dysphoria. Some people who've had a miserable, miserable life under their old name will call it dead name with some relish, like they've killed an old enemy. They've killed their doppelganger that was stealing their life and now they can have it. I think you have to have a certain amount of understanding for all different perspectives on that. But when I hear my old name, it's very difficult to hear it. I try to understand that people have known me by their whole life and a lot of their memories are connected to that name, but I really dislike hearing it. I wish I had never been called that name, if I'm honest, but I feel quite conflicted about it. I don't like getting letters for the old name, but it's not as bad as when hearing it on the phone is tricky because it's like bringing me back down to earth. Like I talk to the job center, I talk to the pension company, obviously under my old official, my current legal name, let's say. And there's always that, oh yeah, fuck, that's right. We're not quite there yet. I'll be glad when I can change my name officially. That'll feel good. But it's very difficult to do that in Germany if you're German. I have a loophole because if I changed my name in the UK, it cost me £40 and it took 2 weeks. Whereas in Germany, it can cost up to 2,000 euros because the decision has to be made by a high court judge from the Kammergericht. So you're paying for the time of a judge to sit with your bit of paper and go, huh? This, what is a thing? A trans what? No? Who? And they might say no and you'd still have to pay. So it's pretty fucked in Germany, to be honest. If I change my passport, then the German authorities will have to say, well, okay, we haven't got any good reason to deny this to you in Germany, so I'm just lucky in that sense. Yeah.
But also incredible that some person who really has no connection and no stake in your life gets to make that decision. Now you have to pay them an enormous amount of money for that.
Yeah, this isn't unique to the trans thing. Anyone who's ever applied for a visa knows how it feels to sit in front of a random Beamter and hope that they like your face and haven't had a shit day and are feeling, sympathetic. This is the scariest thing about being trans, the idea that your fate is in the hands of these people and it starts to feel fairly arbitrary. Like I do see a therapist. I've had 1 or 2 sessions so far, and the experience is very weird. You sit. I mean, I've explained it to people this way. I spent 35 years pretending to be a woman, and people believed me without question. But now I'm actually telling the truth. They're like, okay, let's just talk about this. What are you bringing to me? Will I sign your document so you can change your name? Well, let's just hear what you have to say for yourself first, shall we, Mr. Ricks? Such a weird feeling.
Yeah, also
I can't help it that I have tits. I can't help it. I didn't choose them. What can I do? What can I do? If I was sitting here without them, you'd believe me, but you're the reason I'm not sitting here without them. It's very weird. It starts to feel a bit Kafka-y,
It was also new to me that here in Germany a judge has to make the decision if you want to change your name officially, because he will base his judgment on legal things, even so you would assume that being trans should have nothing to do with any legal regulations, but with emotions and your own choice.
Yeah. I mean, it's strange that a name change because of marriage or divorce, fine. But a name change because of, diagnosis of gender dysphoria, whatever the fuck you want to call it, is somehow well, we must immediately involve a legal professional in this because what is going on? It's strange. Whereas there are people who walk around with names that sound like the opposite gender to what they actually are. There are names like Alex and Sam, You could be Samantha or Alexandra, you could be Samuel or Alexander. No one cares about that. It's all just trans panic, and there's really no reason for it. It's very strange.
Yes, definitely.
That doesn't really come under the realm of public health, but it could also stand to be examined.
And I know we already asked you like a lot of questions, and I know that beforehand you told us that we can ask you basically anything. But would you say that there are any questions that you should never ask a trans person?
Yeah, this is again, this is where we want to come back to the point that you have already made, but just to repeat, trans people are definitely not a monolith. I mean, anything to do with your genitalia, just no. Just never. Unless you're a medical professional and it's directly relevant, just no. Or you've already established a certain amount of sexual intimacy and it's time to talk, wishes and limits before you actually have sex. That would be an appropriate time to ask, how do you refer to your genitalia? What word should I use for what's down there? And even then, you don't want to say, do you have a cock or what? Like just don't ask questions about people's junk. If you really, really cannot stand vulvas to that extent, just do not sleep with a trans person if you're that worried. I mean, I feel like some trans people, if they're feeling stronger about that question, will put it in their profiles on dating sites, will roll it out very quickly in the process of becoming intimate, because they don't want that moment where you take off your pants and they go, oh, wait, that's not what I was expecting. I'm out. Like, that I think it's better to let the trans person take the lead. And if you want to ask about their junk in a sexual context, ask about terminology. What do you call what you have down there? How shall I refer to it? Like, that's the safe way and the respectful way. Just no questions about junk. Never ask someone what their old name is. Just don't. That's just not okay, because people don't want to think about it and they feel weird about saying no and they don't want to say yes. So just never ask someone what their old name was. Paradoxically, the one thing I wish people would ask more is, how can I support you if we're out and about together and someone does something shitty to you? Always ask that question. Because some people are like, right, you're my attack dog, you yell at them, you defend me. And other people will say, I just don't like a scene, so we just walk away, we pretend it didn't happen. This is all to the good. This is all good stuff. Let me think. Any other questions that... I mean, asking someone about their medical decisions, again, no, because it could never concern you. You're not their doctor, and that's the only time it could possibly be relevant. So, yeah. I mean, a lot of that is just common sense, I think, isn't it?
Yeah,
Definitely.
for sure. But I think we were talking about, while we were preparing, the kinds of questions, and we also in the terms of this interview have touched on how trans people are constantly medicalized, they're sexualized, and so asking more of these questions, even if it's coming from a place of curiosity and interest, right? So I think that's what a lot of people think. They're like, I'm just curious if this person is now taking estrogen or testosterone, and I want to seem interested in their experience and how things have changed. And so the intention might be good, but like you said, it is no one's business. Your medical history is not someone's business unless you choose to make it that way.
Exactly. And also, let's be clear again, we live in the age of Google. I mean, fuck, if you're that curious about medical transit, there are videos on YouTube where people have documented the whole process. You don't need to ask a random trans person at a party or in the street or on a date. You can go and do the reading yourself. It's like, I believe that Black people and people of color have the same problem. Like, my job isn't to educate you. There's plenty of reading. If you say, I've Googled everywhere I can possibly find to Google, and I have one question I couldn't answer, how would you feel about me asking it? Sure. But they're like, what's it like on hormones? No. Don't. No, just no.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. Google it. Just
Google is your friend.
Google it.
Google it
There's a
first.
phrase for that in every language on the planet. The Japanese are like, ask Google Sensei. You know? There's no excuse for asking personal questions to somebody when there's so many great books out there. Like, I mean, Linus Giese's book, you could say, well, if you're that curious, there are books. But
Yeah.
at the same time, the fact that the person asked is already like, now I feel like a dick, but I also feel angry with you, and now we have to somehow continue this conversation. It's like, so how about that local sports team? You know, it's too late then. It's too late to fix it. So
Yeah.
that would be my advice, and I believe most people would stand behind me on that.
I think that's really good advice.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that, Norgos. And since we're talking about that, I would really like to know what you like most about identifying as a trans man. Just in a short sentence, something like that.
Oh, interesting question. Let me think about that. Well, this is all going to sound very silly, but my first appointment with my therapist was on the 11th of November at 11 o'clock. Does anyone know the significance of that date, or is that a British thing? No, it's Armistice Day. It's the end of World War One. And in the UK, there's a minute's silence at 11 o'clock on the 11th of November. And one of the things that I like about being a trans man is, you know, I'm glad to be part of what is hopefully going to be a new kind of masculinity. This is it's always confused me why in my entire life as a feminist I've always felt more sorry for men deep down, if I'm honest. I think it's just witnessing how men can be so crippled emotionally by their upbringing, and how they get thrown like pieces of meat into every stupid war that happens, and how, you know, it's the nice thing about being a trans man is I'd like to think that the fact that I was raised as female and I'd had to identify as female for so long, it might be possible to model a kind of balance for masculinity that incorporates some femininity. And if I really am careful with this transition, if I can resist the urge to stamp out all the feminine aspects of myself, I think it might be a great way to be a man, and it might be something I can help other men with. That's something I'm really looking forward to. And I also, as silly as it sounds, just because I'm so anti-war, so passionately anti-war, I like the idea that I could replace one of those young men, those teenage men that died in the First World War. Millions and millions and millions and millions of children, basically, 17 years old. This feels great. It's a good time to be a man. It's an exciting time to be a man, and I get to be part of it.
That's really lovely.
Oh, and on a similar note, there's one figure I really should mention. That is my boyfriend, who didn't know he was bi before I transitioned. If you see what I mean. So he's older than me. He's 48, and he's only ever dated women, and that's how people know him. And he's a teacher, and he's, a boxer and a sailor, and he's, kind of a bloke. And his response to this has been absolutely incredible. And he's also kind of a new man. Like, he changed his status on FetLife to heteroflexible. I hope that it's, if this is what I want for masculinity, for men to be in a position where who they thought was their girlfriend can become their boyfriend. They just go, cool. Because I'm making my life sound very utopian, and to be honest, it kind of is. But the trans people that you guys need to think about going forward are the ones who are not as lucky as me, I think.
Yeah, for sure. But I think that a big part of helping people who are not as fortunate as you, who are not in the same situation where they have people who are surrounding them with love and support, is by you being so open with us, by you sharing your story, so that other people who don't know any trans people can become more familiar with this concept if they're not already. Because I know a lot of people are talking about, like, what is this trans thing? This is all very new. It's like literally millions of years. Like, indigenous tribes from around the world have recognized multiple genders, and even uplifted
Mm-hmm.
Other genders. In some Native American cultures, people have a gender called, I'm not sure if it's exactly a gender, but similar to a gender identity, called two-spirit. And
Yes.
these people were considered, and are still considered, quite magical and having a very special place in the tribe. And this has existed for thousands of years.
So many things are strangely fashionable and cyclical. I mean, if you look at history, you can see how much of our current attitude is just a blip. It's simultaneously encouraging and discouraging. This too shall pass, right? I guess, oh goodness, I just thought of another great thing about being a trans man, but I've forgotten what I was going to say. Come on, brain. I've only had 4 cups of coffee. That's the problem. I don't know. I think if you take my example, the valuable thing about my example, despite the fact that I have all this privilege, you know, I speak German, I'm surrounded by people who are semi-clued up or even very clued up, but I'm a perfect example of how smoothly this can go and how much quality of life it can bring to a person if everyone just gives them what they need without asking too many questions. If that's how this treatment procedure goes, you end up like me, in a situation where, yep, I don't love it when people shout at me for going in the men's toilet, but that's literally the worst thing I have to report. So far, you know, touch wood, but if you give trans people what they need and don't pathologize them and don't, you know, force them to second guess themselves, it's just the best thing that ever happens to you in your life, and you can go on from there. And that's how it should be for everyone.
Thank you. And maybe to wrap up all these things we were discussing in the last time, what is one thing you wish cisgender people would know about trans people? So maybe really just one thing, so that we can maybe like give everyone who's listening to our podcast one information they should bear in mind.
One thing that I think all cis people should know is that one of the advantages of living within a system of rules is the pleasure one can take in breaking them. That can take the form of doing what I have done. It can also take the form of relaxing your cis notions of what your gender is. You might find that if you experiment a little bit, you'll have fun, and it'll sharpen your appreciation for what it is to be a man or a woman. A nice example is one of my best friends in the UK, 6-foot tweedy private school boys teacher. He started wearing glittery nail polish. And he just said, it's strange how this tiny little thing has just made my day slightly better. It feels like a little special feature, and it was bizarrely joyful. I would encourage everyone who lives within the gendered system to play more and don't be boxed in. It's a nice way to go through life. You'll be surprised how people react.
Yeah,
I love that.
and I think
answer.
that's also
Freedom is catching.
Yeah,
It's ansteckend.
and that's a small thing that everyone could do without much risk to sort of get an idea of how constructed all of our concepts of gender are.
Right. And I mean, if you can keep the system but give people more freedom within it, it's actually quite fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow. Eliot, thank you so much for giving us insight into your lived experience as a trans man and the challenges you face, but also all the joy. I'm so happy that this conversation has been so positive. And I anticipated it would be, but I'm still really, really happy, because I think a lot of the conversations surrounding transgender people are often very sad and miss out on the euphoria, as you said, that it can bring a person. So we're really, really grateful for your openness and your honesty with us.
I think there's a lot to be optimistic about. And if you want to check in a year's time, then maybe I'll have a sexy little goatee beard. And if you guys really want the future, you should try and do this again sometime with a non-binary person. They're utterly fascinating. They're actually the real pioneers.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Eliot.
Thank you for your time and questions, and I wish you guys all the best with your studies.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Eliot.
you.
I promised you guys a dog, by the way, just because it was a tease.
Ah, no.
Oh, he looks so fluffy.
So cute.
Best doggy in the world. No, that's another positive note to finish on.
Excellent. Alrighty, and thank you to our listeners for taking some time to learn something new with us today.
Check out Linus Giese's book. Purchase it. Give him all your money.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Great.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Okay, time off for breakfast. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.